The History of Water Polo by Skylar Wilkinson. Today, the game is played with two teams of 7 players in the water. Markings on the pool indicate the goal line, the 2-meter line, the 5-meter line, and half. Some basic rules are as follows. If a player receives the ball while they are inside the 2-meter line, it is a turnover. So players must be outside the 2-meter zone to gain possession before moving in. After a player is fouled, they have the option to shoot. The only distance this is legal from is outside the 5-meter zone. If a player shoots within the 5-meter after a foul or hesitates, a turnover will be called. All players must use one hand only at all times. The ball is in play, except for the goalie. The goalie can use 2 hands on the ball anywhere inside the 5-meter zone. The basic setup for field offensive players is an umbrella around the center or hole set. Water polo today is an extremely intricate, painful, and endurance-based sport, though in the beginning it was far more simple. The sport dates back to the 19th century in England, but the concept goes much farther and there is little known about it. The name water polo comes from the similarity of passing as in horseback polo, which the word polo came from the Indian word pulu. The game we know today was brought up in 1869. A rubber ball had begun to replace the original ball, which was made from a pig's stomach. In 1870, the London Swimming Club formulated the rules for the sport and hosted the first official game at the Crystal Palace Plunge in London. Games resembled rugby in the water and were based more on brute strength and athletic skill. Underwater wrestling would leave some players barely conscious when they managed to get to the surface. In 1880, rules were introduced in Scotland to shift the game's focus to skill over force. A bigger ball, similar to a soccer ball, was used. Nets were introduced, and players could no longer tackle opponents who did not have possession of the ball. The same rules still apply to today's game. Still, though, the game was very different. In the United States, there was the American style, which was not like how the Europeans played. Players of the time were able to leave the pool, and violence was huge. And as the sport grew, so did the amount of violence. It was common for players to be dragged underwater and surface unconscious. Meanwhile, countries in Europe adopted the Scottish rules. Hungary in 1889, Belgium in 1900, Austria and Germany in 1894, and France in 1895. In 1900, water polo was so popular that it was the first team sport introduced into the Olympics. Great Britain won the gold medal in the first 4 Olympics. In 1911, the Fédération Internationale des Nations Amateurs, FINA, the international governing body for all amateur water sports, adopted the Scottish rules for all international water polo events. The U.S. still didn't adopt these rules. In 1912, instead of playing their semifinal game in the national championship tournament, the New York Athletic Club and the Chicago Athletic Association chose to fight instead. This was the reason the Amateur Athletic Union canceled their sponsorships of water polo until 1914, when the United States clubs finally agreed to play under more civilized international rules. Over the years, the sport parted from its rugby-like ways and moved closer to those of soccer, where you can only make contact with a player when they have the ball. The evolution of swimming also had a great impact on the sport, as it moved away from brute underwater strength to skilled passing and above water speed. One of the most interesting incidents in water polo history was brought about by Germany invading Hungary to suppress an anti-communist uprising. During the 1956 Olympic Games, Germany and Hungary faced off, and the game was violent. Fights were consistently being started, and eventually the officials called off the match. Hungary was awarded the victory as they were 4-0 at this point. Hungary moved on to eventually win gold. The first Water Polo World Cup for women was in 1979 and was held by FINA, and the first World Championship was held in 1986. It wasn't until 2000 when women's water polo was added to the Olympic Games agenda. Russia won gold that year. Water polo became a college sport in the 70s, and it wasn't implemented for women until 30 years later. Today, the only non-European team to win an Olympic gold medal is Team USA. For women, the dominance is not in Europe. Rather, it's in Canada and the United States, as they repeatedly contend for gold for the Olympics and World Championships.